are environmental activists their own worst enemy? Is a question. Dominique, I probably wouldn't have said that until this afternoon. I had an activist on this morning, and it really mattered to me, given how much antipathy and anger there is towards Extinction Rebellion, that their activists had a chance, a platform to really explain to us and persuade us all about the climate change crisis. Their social media people have reduced that entire interview, where she really was given the space for us to understand, to bring hearts and minds on board, into one jokey comment that I made. And they did precisely the same thing that they claim that the mainstream media do to them. Hypocrisy of the worst kind, it seems to me. Are they their own worst enemy? I wouldn't have said that, Dominique, until now, but I tell you, I am so angry about this, and I'm pretty persuaded that they are. What do you say?
Well, I think it's very clear that they're their own worst enemy. I mean, it emerged in the last few days that one of the co-founders drives a diesel car, despite telling everybody else that they're evil if they drive a diesel car, and we need to get rid of them and replace them with electric. There is a hypocrisy amongst them, and I think it's because with Extinction Rebellion, a lot of their aims are driven by extremes, which is why statistically the public does seem to have a very low view of Extinction Rebellion due to the absolute chaos that they regularly cause to happen. Right. I mean, a few of their aims here, they want zero emissions in 4 years, for example, which would require the banning of private and public transport. It would send, the economy to a standstill as we know it. They want the instant banning of flying. They want to confiscate 90% of the assets of the wealthiest. And they drive these aims by extremely wild and wacky predictions. For example, they predicted that 6 billion will die in this century, which is why we need all of these extreme measures. And I think what's frustrating for me is that with Extinction Rebellion in particular, they hardly ever want to talk about powers like China, which contribute the most to global emissions. Throughout their literature, they target Western countries, but never want to target China, which plays a great role in tackling climate change and should be held more to account.
Well, Dominic, I put that to their activist, and that was one area where I would agree with you that the question was fudged. And part of the reason for that is because you can't go and campaign against climate change in China because you'd be put in prison. And I started this talking about the delights and the joys and the privileges of campaigning. But yeah, I think that's a meaningful point. Richard Power Sayeed, you were a former Labour advisor, and part of that is getting your political messaging out there and persuading people of your political point of view. Do you think actually Extinction Rebellion are interested in that at all? Given what I've seen this afternoon, the silly response to the tweet, I have to say I'm not sure of it. I'm just gonna read what they've written. Just pause for a second. It's coming up on screen now. It says, Robbie Rinder at Judge Rinder TV is just telling our activist Claire Totty on Talk Radio that rebels are all ugly. Typical journalistic incompetence from the joke flakes. Get down to Oxford Circus, Robbie. It's well fit. And I'm going to tweet my response, but just to be clear, how dare you reduce an interview in which your passionate, informed, and serious activist Claire Totty was given time to advocate on the climate change crisis? I wanted us all fairly to hear. You've reduced those remarks to this. I wonder whether you care about sharing your message with everyone. You will have read, perhaps, sorry for the long speech, Richard, I'm just incredibly cross about it. You'd have read The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell. And it was especially on display in some of the extreme left activism, where actually a number of the people who purport to care about and speak for the working classes, the most challenged, those that have the least reach to power, actually despise the working class, not interested in bringing them on board. This is really activism for themselves. And I have to say, having seen this, it strikes me as the poorest form of activism. What do you say about that, Richard Sayeed?
Well, I think and I'm sure you've got a very tough skin.
I do, but it has its limits, Richard.
I think you might be slightly overreacting to that tweet, if I may say so. but maybe it's not a very kind tweet. I think we can agree that.
No, I just think it's a pity. And to really deal with the sort of central issue here, it's about hearts and minds.
Okay,
if you want you're an activist and an advisor. How would you be advising this organisation to really win hearts and minds?
Okay, let's look in the history books. Let's look at how people responded to the suffragettes 100 years ago. They were campaigning on a similarly kind of existential issue, the fact that women were denied fundamental political rights, any influence over their society through politics. Well, I think, the fact that our society is threatened with something very close to extinction. Hundreds of thousands of people in this country will lose their homes in the next few generations if the sea levels are allowed to rise in the way they are. Food shortages will become normal. Many people will die in flash floods and as temperatures rise. Just in this country I'm talking about now, people are already dying around the world because of climate change. In that kind of situation, yes, pissing people off is absolutely, it's an inevitable consequence of the political failure to deal with climate change.
Richard, can I ask you, Richard?
Let me finish. Right. When the suffragettes broke the law, because they had to, in order to get attention, in order to campaign on the issue that they had to, they were described in equally dismissive ways as Extinction Rebellion and climate activists are now. We now lionize them as heroes because we recognize that what they did was necessary.
Yes, but you'll also know that there were intervening historical factors that really ultimately led to societal change of heart and mind, not least the First World War.
The First World War created the situation.
I'm not going to argue about the
way that you achieve political change is not just by some structural factors happening. If I may say so, that makes you sound like a rather orthodox Marxist, Robbie.
Listen to me.
Historical change is achieved is that campaigners work on these issues at the same time as that big structural change happens, and it's the two things going together that makes change
I understand
happen.
that. You're missing, you're not listening, and what I'm talking about is how we become effective advocates. I care about this. Right? How we, you're a political advisor, how we act in a persuasive way to bring as many people on board. Now, I've read that report and, I find the findings terrifying and compelling. But part of the difficulty with climate change activism is what I was saying before, is it's been shanghaied by spokespeople who are the most privileged and consequently do most violence to that movement. That's the first thing. It's also often curated and presented through the prism of catastrophe. And, when people's lives are already suffering, they don't want to hear that the world is ending tomorrow. They don't want to hear that voice of doom. There needs to be positive reasons why people should change their lives. And the starting point should be there. That's a communication issue. That's what I'm talking about.
That's what the Labour Party is all about, right? The Labour Party's been offering a Green New Deal. That means hundreds of thousands of jobs coming out of the green energy sector. That's jobs, long-term, well-paid manufacturing jobs and jobs in the energy sector, whether that's research jobs, whether that is going and insulating homes to keep people warm and cut their energy bills. Unfortunately, the mainstream media, including, I'm afraid to say, talk radio, did not give enough time to those policies which have an enormously positive impact on people. That's what I talk about when I talk about the climate crisis, about the extraordinary opportunities that there are, and the fact that the reason that Boris Johnson isn't advocating for the same policies is that he's backed by corporate donors who don't have any interest in working class people getting long-term skilled jobs. He's got an interest in backing the people who pay for the Tory party to exist.
Dominique, I'm going to bring Dominique in here. Dominique, you're shaking your head at that. What's your response to that? Green New Deal disaster?
Yeah, firstly, to compare what Extinction Rebellion are doing to the suffragettes, I think is absolutely ridiculous and quite laughable,
What are you talking about? The world is on fire, Dominique. What are you talking about? This is pathetic. This is really pathetic. This makes me so angry. There are people dying all around the world right now.
See, anger's not helping you. I think we need to listen to Dominique. You had quite some time there, Richard. Just pause, listen and hear for a second. I hear your anger. It's important. Do carry on, Dominique.
Yeah, Richard, you're foaming at the mouth and you look really angry, and I think you need to
Yeah, I
calm
am.
down.
I'm really angry.
Okay.
You should be ashamed. You should be ashamed of yourself for saying that this isn't as important.
You are a prime example of what the issue is, because when anyone actually tries to address some of the ridiculous points you make, you freak out, quite frankly.
Okay, tell me what the ridiculous points I was making. What were the ridiculous points I was
and that's
making?
why 17% of the UK population have a positive view of Extinction Rebellion. You guys aren't doing very well.
Extinction Rebellion. I don't support Extinction Rebellion. I support dealing with climate change, which you're saying doesn't matter.
Dominique, listen, Richard, we're not helped by you not listening. Dominique, let's just answer the question that Richard poses you, the challenge, which is say he doesn't support Extinction Rebellion. He wants to package this in positive policy reasons why people should become more green, and he does that through the prism of what the Labour Party was doing. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? And I hear what you say about the suffragettes, by the way, but do carry on.
Yeah, but I mean, I just want to say you can't compare that to Extinction Rebellion and them having to piss people off when they're calling for things like not net zero, but zero carbon emissions in 4 years, which would detrimentally impact the poor. The government has already announced plans with its green agenda that will again detrimentally impact the poor. I have here that achieving net zero will cost more than £50,000 for every family in the UK. Families earning average income or below quite simply will not be able to afford that.
What do you think climate change is going to cost people?
To achieving net zero and climate change, okay? To act like nobody's addressing it is quite simply factually incorrect. Instead of virtue signalling here, why don't you talk about China? You don't want to talk about China.
Richard,
I'll very happily talk about China. Very happily talk about China.
Go on then.
Yeah? Okay. You can't tell someone to take their feet off the train. If you're in the train, someone's got their feet on the seat. You can't tell them to take theirs off the seat if you've got your feet on the seat, can you?
We're as bad as China. Are we as bad as China, Richard?
We've got to lead this.
Okay.
Now, the fact is that most of a very significant proportion of China's emissions are coming from things that we're buying, we're investing in, and we're buying. So it's actually the super rich in Britain who are putting that money in, who are responsible for those emissions. The fact is that China's got a terrible government led by very terrible people, but they're not responsible for the emissions that we pay
Richard,
for.
can I put something to you for a second? Just pause for a second, both of you. You're talking for a second. It's important. Richard, let me ask you this. One thing that we might agree on, perhaps on both sides, is this. I suspect you go out there as a political advisor and you do your best to listen, especially in communities that Labour lost, Hartlepool, Sedgefield, Bolsover, places that were, tribally Labour. When you go into the hearts of those communities that have all been but forgotten, they want to talk about injustice, real places of barren deserts of social injustice, lack of services, lack of legal aid, lack of special educational needs. You name it, right? I've stood there and listened and had the gift of hearing them when they've been constantly told that their opinions aren't of any value, and worse still, that they are little Englanders and racist. You name it, they get called a lot. Those communities that should be part of Labour, when you go and ask them whether or not they care about climate change, it's very, very down the list. Now, as a political advisor, as somebody who cares so deeply and passionately as you clearly do, how can you persuade those communities who must be persuaded that this should matter to them?
I'm not trying to persuade people to care about climate change. I'm trying to persuade people to care about the amazing jobs that will come out of revolutionizing the energy sector in this country. We used to be a country that makes things. That's what people tell me when I go around the country and talk to people who live in deindustrialized areas. We used to be a country that makes things, and we could be again, but it requires a government that's going to invest in the energy sector so that we're creating hydrogen fuel cells, so that we're creating the batteries of the future, so that we're creating wind farm technology, solar barrages, what am I saying? Tidal barrages, this innovative technology that actually British researchers are at the forefront of. We should be making that in this country, creating long-term, skilled, well-paid jobs. This is possible. This government has chosen not to.
Dominique, I want you to close off the debate. You've got literally about 45 seconds.
Okay, I want people like Richard to be honest with people about how that's going to happen. You talk about brilliant new jobs, but you have to be honest about the fact that this is going to cost households a lot of money, and a lot of jobs will have to be lost that won't be immediately replaced. Be honest with people. You've been clear that your job isn't to convince people, and judging by your behaviour in this panel, you won't be convincing many more people after they've listened to you.
Well, it was always interesting to listen to Richard Power Sayeed.